You can speak. I can hear you.
Who are you?
I am the creator of a video game that brings RNG, poor design, and microtransactions to millions.
Then who am I?
You're the
Scrub.
Listen to me, Truman. There's no more truth out there than there is in the world I created for you. Same lies. The same deceit. But in my world, you have nothing to fear. You're afraid. That's why you can't leave.
In case I don't see ya. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Yeah.
I am Razio.
What's up, you beautiful bastards? Welcome back. Now, if you're like me, you love MMORPGs. I mean, shit, it's what my channel is mostly about. It's what I've done more content on than anything else. And I love all forms of the RPG, ARPG, regular RPGs, JRPG, etc. And I cover all of that in my channel, as well as some, you know, really messed up stuff that goes on in the industry. But the majority of my channel is about MMOs. It's my favorite genre. So why do so many people quit? I'm obviously no stranger to quitting. I've quit WoW 1,000 times. I've obviously quit playing Final Fantasy 14. I've played well over 30, 40 MMORPGs, you know, since I was a teenager. And obviously I've quit all of those. But aside from regular reasons of why people quit, you know, reasons like life events, marriage, having children, getting a new job, moving somewhere, I mean, going to prison, your wife's just a bitch and tries to control everything you do. There's a lot of different reasons that are pretty normal. Now, these reasons I just listed are not reasons that cause player bases to abandon a game in droves. You know, when the headlines start reading, such as in Warlords of Draenor, when WoW lost more players than ever, and, you know, like what's going on right now in Final Fantasy XIV's Dawn Trail, where the numbers are taking a serious hit. What causes this sort of thing? Now, a lot of these players quit, and when you ask them why, they'll cite various reasons. You know, like, I didn't like this, I didn't like that. But there's a nagging feeling inside of you. And I think if you're an MMO player that's quit, you know what I'm talking about when you reach that point. And you can't quite put your finger on it. But hey, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to tell you exactly what that feeling is. Games lose, MMOs specifically, and not just MMOs, other games as well, but MMOs lose players in huge amounts. When you see those big dips going down in Steam, that nagging feeling, it's all one very simple reason. The game has stopped respecting your time. And the craziest part about all of this is this used to be the MMORPG specialty, respecting your time. Go back to like Gen 1, early Gen 2 MMOs, you know, going back to like Assurance Call, Dark Age of Camelot, EverQuest, Ultima Online, then you finally get into like Vanilla WoW, etc. And this genre was just known for being very respectful of your time. You never got that nagging feeling. Now, to dig into what causes you to feel like the game is wasting your time, we're gonna have to dig into some fine details. Now, obviously the best four MMOs, I should say, on the market right now, the most populated ones are World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV, Guild Wars 2, and Elder Scrolls Online. Now, I haven't had enough hands-on time with ESO or Guild Wars 2 to really use them as examples because it just wouldn't be fair. I'm gonna use games where I got this feeling and then show you where the games start making you feel like you waste your time. So we're going to focus primarily on World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV. Now, keep in mind, some of the reasons I bring up will easily cross over not only between the two games, but also into games in other genres. And the first one I'm going to talk about is a big deal. Now, if you've watched any of my content, especially when I'm talking about what I like in MMOs, you'll know that I really think that death should be punishing. It should be way more punishing than it is in Final Fantasy XIV or World of Warcraft. It should mean something. It should be something you actively try to avoid, as opposed to now where it's just essentially the same kind of death you get when you die in Call of Duty. However, it's very possible to go completely too far in the other direction. Games like Final Fantasy XI. I'm even going to do a call out here of a game I'm actually really enjoying right now in the alpha, Ashes of Creation. The death penalty is just too severe. I mean, if there should be impossible where if you log into a game for the evening, let's say you spend 2, 3, 4 hours playing and then you log out. If it's possible for you to log out, not only behind, but way behind where you started because you just had a bad night, even down leveling like in Final Fantasy XI's case, that's bad design. It should be punishing, but not so punishing that it reverses time. When players feel too punished for a death, because a lot of times your deaths in these games aren't even your fault, you start to not want to play the game. And this is true too in a game right now like Path of Exile 2, when you're in the higher levels and you die. It makes you just want to shut the fucking game off, to be quite honest with you. And when that happens, I mean, when you log in, you die a bunch and you log out, and then the next time you log in and you see you're like way behind, you went down in experience, you lost a bunch of items, you pretty much lost a ton of progress, your keyboard is going to be taking more shots than Lily Phillips' face.
That's really fucked up.
Now, another big thing that can completely demoralize a player and make them not want to play the game anymore and feel like the game is not respecting their time is when the class you chose, the job you play, whatever they call it in your specific game, either gets very heavily homogenized with the other classes or gets hit with a nerf bat so hard that your class pretty much becomes irrelevant. Now, this is true between both games and a lot of ARPGs as well. Developers need to do a much better job, and instead of nerfing tons of classes, unless there's one class that's a huge outlier, I understand bringing it in line with the others, but that's generally not how it goes. The pendulum of the nerf bat generally tends to swing way too hard in one direction, and it ends up completely tanking a class/job. Now, as far as homogenization is concerned, that makes everybody feel bad, because then it doesn't feel like you're unique, especially if when you first started playing the game years prior, your class was unique. As it gets homogenized over time, the time you spent learning your class feels absolutely pointless. This next one goes hand in hand with the previous one, and it's definitely more exclusive to World of Warcraft, is when the PvP balance is very poor. Now, when the game isn't balanced in PvP, but yet there's PvP-focused content, and this is something Ashes of Creation is going to have to figure out the answer to this problem, because it's a problem in any game that has PvP, is how to make it as balanced as possible. If your game has heavily focused PvP and the class that you aesthetically identify with the most, the class you feel is the most fun for you, ends up being absolute dog shit in PvP, it's going to completely demotivate you to play, especially if you find that out later and you're like, well, now I just feel like I wasted my time leveling up this character. PvP balance is essential if PvP is a main focus of your game, if you don't want to make your players feel like you're wasting their time. This next one is huge. Cash shops and monetization. Essentially, if you have a sub to play, a box price on top of that on your game, and then you then go and lock all the coolest armor, the coolest mounts, the coolest looking weapons, and cloaks and everything else, and level skips, server transfers, and all this other horse shit behind a paywall instead of in the game, it just makes players that are working for cool items in the game feel like it's pointless, that they're wasting their time, that everything could be so much easier for them if they just, swipe their credit card. And it's very disheartening when you see, for example, World of Warcraft, the Brutusar mount that came out most recently, $90, you could get one of the rarest mounts, which is actually better than the original Brontosaur mount, because this one actually has everything on it, including a mailbox. And so that just demoralized so many players. In my opinion, I understand cash shops being in games like Path of Exile 2 that have, or Path of Exile 1, for example, or like upcoming in Ashes of Creation, because a lot of those items are still available by working in-game, and the game doesn't make money any other way, right? Where they need to make money somehow to keep the servers running, to keep people playing, to keep the networks healthy, what have you. But the egregious amount of microtransactions and, you know, RMTs and that kind of bullshit that we see, I mean, just go look at the Mog Station shop on Final Fantasy XIV. It's an absolute pathetic joke, and the prices make it even worse. It's so bad, and any developer listening to this, please stop with this absolute shit. Now the next one. This one's also pretty big. I understand that RNG is important in all RPGs and in many different game genres. RNG is a very useful tool, otherwise the game gets beat instantly. But something we're seeing far too commonly these days is way too much RNG. Now, to WoW's credit, they've improved that a little bit, you know, back from the Titan forging and all that bullshit. I don't even want to get into that, but a lot of games, another good example is Path of Exile 2, is when there's way too much RNG, it becomes demotivating to play. You know, when you have a higher chance of catching an STD from a virgin than you do getting the item you want in a game, people aren't going to want to play your fucking game. Just let's be real. And RNG, as I said, is a good thing, but we're seeing it far too often, it being stretched out and used as a tool / method to prolong content that shouldn't last that long. How often items drop, how rare an item is, what stats roll on the item, when you're crafting, what quality you can get. There's all these different factors of RNG, and when you stack them all up on top of each other, and there doesn't feel like there's any real end point to getting the item, people are just going to get demotivated and stop playing. Yes, you'll notice that the word demotivated, unmotivated are going to be very common in this video. Just deal with it. All right, the next talking point, the next thing that makes players feel like their time is wasted, and that's when developers add way too much throwaway content and catch-up gear / mechanics. Now, if you've watched my channel for any reasonable amount of time, you know how much I hate catch-up gear in MMORPGs. I loved it back in the day. We know whether I started playing a game like Vanilla WoW, Assurance Call, EverQuest, what have you, the day the game launched or a year afterwards, I still had to take the same steps that all the other players before me had to. Now, granted, it might be a little easier because I could join a guild and talk to people, get help, get advice from more experienced players, which is totally okay. But the fact that they just add in every other patch or whatever, you know, a way to just instantly catch up to everybody else, it makes the players that did the work for the gear when it was current feel like, well, they wasted their time. They wasted their life doing that, because if they would have just started playing a bit later, they would have gotten all that shit 10 times easier. I think, in my honest opinion, catch-up gear and those sorts of mechanics need to just be removed from games. They're ultimately just participation trophies. And all you got to do is take a look at Gen Z and most millennials to understand where that eventually leads to. It's not good. The mindset it creates is entitlement, and it really just creates a huge pack of pussies, which I don't like to play with pussies. So does that mean I like to play with dicks? No, I don't.
What are you gay?
And you know, Final Fantasy XIV is a way bigger offender of this than World of Warcraft is. I mean, don't get me wrong, both do, you know, horrendous catch-up mechanics and gear, but 14's completely invalidates everything. The crafting gear in that game make a gear system that already has 99.9% useless gear even more useless. And I've never seen a company design a game in such a way that when new content launches, it's already worthless and dead content the day it comes out the door. A good example, 24-man raids and that kind of content. And people will do it for the story, but then they'll never touch it again unless they're randomly forced into it through a roulette, because the rewards just aren't there for most of the characters that stuck it out and played through the game. And that's the rub here, right? On this whole topic of the game making you feel like it wasted your time with catch-up gear and poor content, like rush content, catch-up content, essentially, is that it makes the players that were loyal to the game, that stuck around even through lulls and problems, feel like their loyalty to the game wasn't rewarded. In fact, it was punished because they had a harder time than people who just fucked off and then came back later. Now, this next point is way more specific to World of Warcraft, but when Mythic Plus was first announced in World of Warcraft, it was met with a lot of glee because, quite frankly, the dungeon system, after your initial leveling process to cap, the dungeons were all worthless for the longest time in World of Warcraft. They added Mythic Plus, but these days it's gotten so bloated, so stupid, quite frankly, with how they do the affixes, with the timers on it, that how the very system is designed, it makes you feel like you waste your time. On top of that, the rewards, and I know they're planning on changing this, I've heard it through the grapevine, but the reward system for Mythic Plus is essentially so much worse than the other avenues for getting gear in the game. And when you brick a key and you're punished because you didn't beat the timer fast enough, which, by the way, the timer enforces a meta, a very strict meta, because you have to beat the timer to make it even kind of worth your time. You'll spend 30 minutes in a dungeon, 40 minutes on some of the longer ones, barely, and if you barely miss the timer, that 30, 40 minutes of your life is just gone. This makes people just flat out not want to do it. And I don't know about you guys, but especially in the MMO genre, players don't like to feel rushed. They don't like to feel like they're in a race all the time in the game itself. Like, I understand players like racing to level cap, racing to get this, very rare item before anyone else. But a race against time, a timer itself in the literal sense, is not fun in most games, especially not in MMORPGs. And hopefully Blizzard fixes this, but right now it really has pushed a lot of people out. Like, quite frankly, the current season 1 of War Within, is probably one of the worst Mythic Plus seasons ever released in the game. Now, don't get me wrong, the PvP system is probably one of the worst as well. Again, go back to my earlier point about PvP balance. But Final Fantasy XIV also, in terms of dungeons, especially when they released their very hard 4-man dungeons, they're not blameless either. They are also a huge waste of time. But Final Fantasy XIV's time wasters boils down to the systems themselves, and we'll get into more on that in a minute. Now, I've said this 1,000 times, and I'm sorry if I keep sounding like a broken record here, but I don't think really hero one-person focused narratives belong in MMORPGs. I really enjoyed Final Fantasy XIV's up until Endwalker. End of Endwalker, but if that is your main drive to your game, is its narrative, which it is in games like Final Fantasy XIV, Star Wars: The Old Republic, etc. If that's your main pull, and then it's bad, people definitely feel like you wasted their time. And then when you ignore feedback and double down on the same shit, like Dawntrail is doing, people feel like you waste their time. I mean, I think one of the biggest, and I've said this in my other video, which you can see up here right now, and the link will be in the description down below if you want to watch that video, that the biggest reason Final Fantasy XIV's, all the flaws and all of its systems are being exposed now is because its biggest draw and the thing most people played the game for is now terrible, which is its story. I can't imagine how people must be feeling, not only those that, feel like Dawntrail has wasted their time, but that their whole experience in Final Fantasy XIV up to that point has been a waste of time, now that all the systems they've been playing for all these years have been exposed to be absolute garbage. I mean, that's going to be completely subjective, how someone feels about that, but clearly this has been a bad use of people's time to play through a poor story when the story is the main thing you try to use to draw players in. By the way, I kind of missed it, but I'm digging more into Final Fantasy XIV at this point, because right now it's undergoing the biggest exodus of players that feel like their time has been wasted. But the next one is useless and uninteresting gear from nearly every activity in the game. The gear system itself is boring, and the gear is actually useless. Now, I've said this in other videos too. that Final Fantasy XIV's gear in the game is absolutely pointless and useless. It's always instantly, you know, when a new tier comes out, the crafted gear is abyss for the most part, and the people that got the savage gear from the previous tier pretty much wasted their time. How much effort you have to put into ultimates. Now, I know a lot of people do ultimates for the achievement, not the weapon you get, but the reward you get for ultimates, like the weapon, even though it looks very aesthetically pleasing in most cases, the power increase it gives to your character is not worth the time. And a lot of people may feel that wastes their time. I don't know about that. I personally never did ultimates because I thought they were a waste of time. The same reason I don't do mythic raiding anymore in World of Warcraft, because I don't feel the reward is worth how much effort and time I have to put in to get it. But if your entire gear system itself, if every piece of gear that exists in the game is uninteresting, provides no set bonuses, there's no, you know, special stats you can put on it, nothing about the gear that changes the actual gameplay of the game, and they're all essentially glorified stat sticks, that makes people feel like it's a waste of time and you don't respect their time when they go after that gear. And that's why you see a lot of people that just don't give a fuck, and essentially a huge portion of the player base has just turned 14 into a weeb MIRC at this point. I mean, quite literally, the gear in Final Fantasy XIV is like getting a participation trophy that's also a white elephant gift. It's absolutely useless and kind of embarrassing that you spent that much time getting it. All right, another one for Final Fantasy XIV exclusively, and this one really saddens me, and it's the relic weapons. If you look through, if you're unfamiliar with what relic weapons are, they've been in the game since ARR's launch, and they were essentially a weapon that would eventually be best in slot that you would slowly upgrade over the course of several patches as new storyline and quests came out to make it stronger. And it was quite a grind, but it was actually quite fun. I quite enjoyed it, especially even though it was like a very grindy and a very long process. The relic weapon in A Realm Reborn, Heavensward, even Stormblood overall was pretty great. And now we're seeing it, how it's been reduced to being pretty much the same process as you get all the other gear with just tomes. And it's, even though it still may look cool in most cases, it's been watered down and dumbed down and homogenized to the same level as other gear. And so now, if you spend the time getting it, it just feels like the game isn't respecting your time because it doesn't offer the same level of grind that fed into the same high level reward that it once was. Now it's just another stat stick that just glows at a different color and looks kind of cool. And it's really sad to see that happen because that was one of my favorite parts of that game, was the relic weapon set every single expansion, and it just got worse and worse and worse after Stormblood and more pathetic to get, and to the point where they're pretty much just handing them out now. That makes people feel like they wasted their time. Now this next one is a big one, and it's probably going to be a little controversial, and it's something that I've only ever seen that primarily exists in theme park MMOs. And that is when a new expansion comes out, how they absolutely invalidate all the gear, all the items, and in the entire land masses of the previous expansion or original game. That really makes it feel like the game doesn't respect your time. All that time you felt in an expansion or doing something becomes irrelevant the next expansion. Now that's not something you typically see in sandbox MMOs. The whole world generally stays relevant when they add in new content. Sure, there's new, stronger stuff, new areas to go to, but it doesn't invalidate the rest of the world that you've been playing in sandbox MMOs. I just never saw it happen in EverQuest and Assurance Call, in Ultima Online. I just didn't see it. But it's something that's exclusive, I think, to the theme park MMO design. You know, the new rides open and the old rides are obsolete and absolutely pointless. So you'll grind through them super fast when, you know, you make a new character or an alt or something. But it generally feels like the game doesn't respect your time and all the time you spent playing, you know, the previous version of the game. And am I wrong about that? If you guys disagree on this one, this is probably where I get the most traction, but in terms of feedback. But that's just how I feel about it. And people will always say, "Oh, it's just normal. It's normal, man. That's how it is in new expansion. You know, like the green gear you pick up off trash mobs in the first zone of the new area is supposed to be better than the epic gear you got in the hardest dungeon / raid from the previous expansion." I think it's stupid, and there was even some designers at Blizzard that brought that up who now no longer work for them when they were designing Burning Crusade. But I digress. Let's just keep moving forward. Something you'll notice is that right now, especially when you look at like Final Fantasy XIV, the mass exodus that's going on, and you look at how many players that still play World of Warcraft actually prefer to play WoW Classic, especially now that they've released the new realms, and you've seen the pattern of WoW Classic releases. Then they did Burning Crusade Classic, then Wrath of the Lich King Classic, and then I think now they're getting ready to release Mists of Pandaria. It's gone through, you know, Cataclysm and all that shit now. With each one that comes out, that's when the game got more disrespectful of people's time, each expansion after, and you are seeing the numbers of each one drop. People are less interested in playing the other ones. But the second they open a brand new straight up playing Classic server, the numbers jump way up. People are streaming in the game, people are going back, because the game, WoW Classic, vanilla World of Warcraft, is highly respectful of its players' time. The things in the best items in the game are game changing, build changing, but they take effort and time to get. The best crafting things take effort and time to get. You know, organizing a 40-man raid, which is much harder than organizing an 8 or 24 or a 10, you know, man raid, is more rewarding when you go through that content and you organize that many people to blast through content. The games of old respected your time. The modern MMOs do not. And not just MMOs, as I said earlier, modern games in general do not respect players' time. And it's pretty clear. Once players start feeling like their time in the game is not respected, that they're overly punished, there's too much RNG, the systems in the game directly work against them, the gear is boring or useless, new players are just too allowed to either through some stupid catch-up system or swipe a credit card and instantly catch up to you. Players don't want to play your game anymore. They want to leave. And that, I think, is what causes more burnout than anything else. And it's a compounding problem, because as more people get that feeling of my time isn't being respected and they leave, their friends that were just hanging around because their friends were still there are going to leave as well. We've seen this in World of Warcraft. We're seeing this right now in Final Fantasy XIV. I'm sure it's happened in Guild Wars 2, in ESO to some degree. I can't speak to that directly because I don't know. I haven't been involved with those games. But this is a huge issue. And these are problems that are very easy to solve because they're problems that didn't exist in Gen 1 and early Gen 2 MMOs. The theme park MMO created them. I did a whole spiel on theme parks and why they're shit and their design is shit. You can see that video here. It's also in the description if you're interested. But anyway, guys, I'm interested now, most of all, in your thoughts. What do you think? Did I perfectly describe what that nagging feeling is when you don't feel like your time in the game is being respected and you're just wasting it? That's how I felt anyway. Anyway, guys, comments down below. I read them all. I really enjoy reading them. Thanks for all the support over the last month and a half. My channel has grown significantly since then, and I'm going to continue putting out content for you guys. I do stream on Twitch. Sometimes I stream on Twitch and YouTube simultaneously, but all you got to do is, you know, you can follow me on X and you know when I go live. But my schedule as of the end of January is Monday, Wednesday, Saturday, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Hope to see you there. No money's required, just a follow and just hanging out and shooting the shit. But anyway, guys, I'm going to stop blabbing on. I hope you guys take care, and as always, my friends, keep it real.